A man can live inside a false world without ever leaving his house. He can use the right words, repeat the right slogans, perform the right rituals, hold the right opinions, and still be living inside confusion. Why? Because human beings do not live only in the world of immediate sensation. We live in a world mediated by meaning. That is one of Lonergan's most important claims and one of the most illuminating. It is also one of the reasons theology can never be reduced to private feeling or to bare historical data, because faith, culture, scholarship, memory, institutions, symbols, and language all belong to the mediated world. And if meaning is clear, life can be ordered. If meaning is corrupted, life can decay while still looking outwardly intact. So in chapter 3 of Method in Theology, Lonergan turns from the human good to the question of meaning. And he opens with a definition that is not really a definition so much as a map. Meaning, he says, is embodied or carried in human intersubjectivity in art, in symbols and language, and in the lives and deeds of persons. That gives you the whole structure of the chapter. Meaning is not locked inside propositions. Meaning is carried in smiles and gestures, in myths and poems, institutions, speech, action, and persons themselves. And that is why this chapter matters for both faith and scholarship. Because interpretation is never just about words on a page. It is about the world of meaning in which those words live. Lonergan begins below language, though. And this is important. He does not begin with dictionaries or definitions or grammar. He begins with intersubjectivity. Before the we that comes from the mutual love of an I or a thou, he says there is an earlier we, prior to explicit differentiation, vital and functional. He gives the simple example of spontaneously reaching out to save another from falling, just as one spontaneously raises one's arm to ward off a blow. There is perception, feeling, bodily movement, but the act is not first deliberate. It is as though we are members of one another before we have clearly sorted out the boundaries between ourselves. And this is a striking claim. It means that human community is not first assembled from isolated atoms. There is a primordial togetherness in human life. And Lonergan actually deepens the point through Scheller's distinctions. There is a community of feeling, where two or more respond in parallel to the same object. There is fellow feeling, where one responds to the manifested feeling of another. There is psychic contagion, where emotion spreads without clear advertence to its object. And there is emotional identification, where individuality is not yet developed, or else is suspended and reabsorbed into more vital stream of feeling. Already that is enough to explain a great deal of human life. It explains worship and grief, crowds and revolutions, mass enthusiasm and manipulation, the intensity of shared symbolic life. It also explains why meaning is never merely private. We are porous to one another. We can be educated by each other, elevated by each other, corrupted by each other. Now, from intersubjectivity, Lonergan moves to what he calls intersubjective meaning. And here he gives one of the loveliest examples in the whole book, a smile. A smile, he says, is not just a certain combination of lips, facial muscles, and eyes. It's a combination with a meaning. We know that meaning at once, which is why we do not walk the streets smiling at everyone we meet. We know we would be misunderstood. and this is classic Lonergan, he says something so ordinary that we would never think to analyze it, and then shows that it is philosophically decisive. Because the smile reveals a mode of meaning that cannot be reduced to propositions. A smile can welcome, recognize, amuse, refuse, delight, mock, conceal, resign, or even wound. It can be glad or sad, fresh or weary, ironic or warm. It reveals not just first an object, but a subject, not as the conclusion of an inference, but immediately. In the smile, one incarnate subject becomes transparent or hidden to another. This is a reminder, a profound reminder for theology. Not all meaning is said. Some is shown. Some is enacted. Some is born in presence itself. And the one who only looks for propositions will miss entire regions of the human world. From there, Lonergan, he turns to art. His definition, borrowed through Susanne Langer, is quite sharp here. Art is the objectification of a purely experiential pattern. And what he means by that is worth lingering over a bit. Art is not first moral instruction. It's not autobiography. It's not propaganda, not even information. It is the taking up of experience in its own pattern and given it form. Lonergan stresses that the experiential pattern has to be kept pure of alien purposes. Sensation can be subordinated to utility. It can become mere signal processing. It can be bent to theoretical classification. It can be narrowed by moralism or didacticism. Art suspends those reductions. It lets experience recover its own rhythm, tension, development, and fulfillment. The work of art does not merely tell you something. It invites you into a transformed subjectivity and a transformed world. You are taken from ordinary practical time into the time of music, from functional space into the space within a painting, from everyday usefulness into a richer mode of apprehension. That is why art matters for meaning, because it makes available forms of apprehension that literal discourse alone cannot carry. And that matters for faith as well. Religious meaning is not exhausted by definitions. It is also born by icon, by chant, architecture, cadence, gesture, silence, liturgy. If you do not understand that, you do not understand religion as lived. And from that, Lonergan moves from art and turns to symbols. And here, his definition is brief and powerful. A symbol is an image of a real or imaginary object that evokes a feeling or is evoked by a feeling. Now, I know that could sound simple, but the implications are enormous of that, because symbols are not logical tokens. They obey the laws of image and affect, not the laws of formal deduction. They do not prove, they do not overwhelm, they gather meanings, they condense tensions, they express conflict. They permit the coincidentia osportorium, the union of opposites, the logic dislikes but life contains. Lonergan gives the example of St. George and the dragon, for example. The image condenses assent and terror, courage and threat, mastery and possible ruin into one symbolic whole. And he notes that symbols can undergo transvaluation and transformation. What once moved us may cease to move us. What once seemed terrifying may be refigured into deliverance. And that is not decorative surface change. It reflects shifts in the subject's affective development. And this is one of the most useful sections in the whole book because it explains why symbol matters so much in religion. Symbols do not merely stand in for concepts. They mediate between mind and body, mind and heart, heart and body. They are the means by which inner life becomes communicable to consciousness and by which values awaken feeling. So, if someone asks why symbolic language in scripture or liturgy matters, the answer is not that pre-modern people lacked precision. The answer is that symbols do work that precision alone cannot do. They disclose, they move, they integrate, they call the whole person, not just the analytic mind. From symbol, Lonergan moves to linguistic meaning. Here he says that language gives meaning its greatest liberation. Why though? Because conventional signs can be multiplied almost indefinitely, differentiated, specialized, and then used reflexively to analyze meaning itself. In language, meaning becomes vastly more precise, portable, and cumulative. He pauses over Helen Keller's discovery that the touches on her hand were names of objects. And that moment was not just linguistic acquisition, it was a breakthrough info in a world, right? And Lonergan says that we understand from that why ancient civilizations prized names so highly, not because names were magically identical with essences, but because naming is a profound human achievement. It brings consciousness into focus and helps order the world while orienting the self within it. And then from here comes one of Lonergan's deepest insights. Language does not simply label a world already formed. It shapes the world of the speaker. It determines what comes to the foreground, what relations are stressed, what distinctions can be made easily, what becomes salient. Different languages develop differently, and so the best translation is often only the closest possible approximation, not an exact transfer. And from here, Lonergan moves and he distinguishes three broad kinds of language: ordinary language, technical language, and literary language. Ordinary language serves the collaborative pursuit of the human good in everyday life. It is elliptical, contextual, fleeting, and grounded in common sense. Technical language emerges where division of labor and theory demand increasingly specialized vocabularies. And literary language, meanwhile, aims not only at understanding, but at feeling. It stands somewhere between logic and symbol, because it must carry affect as well as sense. And so Lonergan, with Vico, affirms the priority of poetry over the later ideal of literal meaning, literally expressed. And that distinction is essential for anyone doing theology because theology moves through all three. It must speak to ordinary believers in common language. It must achieve precision in technical discourse. And it must never forget the symbolic and literary power by which religious meaning actually lives in a people. Now, alter intersubjectivity in art, in symbol and language. And Lonergan gives us a magnificent phrase. Incarnate meaning, cor ad cor loquitur. Heart speaks to heart. Incarnate meanings, he says, combines many of the other carriers at once. It is the meaning of a person, his way of life, his words, his deeds. It may attach to a heroic event, a martyr, a revolution, a literary character, an orator, a saint, a demagogue. Meaning can be embodied in a life, and he adds with his typical severity, so can meaninglessness. The vacant, the empty, the vapid, the dull can be incarnate too. That matters because not all meaning is textual. Sometimes what a tradition means is revealed most powerfully in the kind of people it produces. Sometimes the truth or hollowness of an institution is visible in the quality of its exemplars. Theology ignores incarnate meaning at its peril. And then Lonergan, after this, becomes even more analytical. He distinguishes sources, acts and terms of meaning. The sources of meaning are conscious acts and intended contents. Their peripheral division is sometimes transcendental and categorical sources. The transcendental are the very dynamism of intentional consciousness, forever heading toward data, intelligibility, truth, reality, and value. The categorical are the specific determinations reached in experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding. Then he distinguishes acts of meaning, potential acts where meaning is still elemental, not yet fully objectified. Formal acts where one conceives, formulates, and defines. Full acts where one judges and settles the status of what is meant. Constitutive or affective acts where one's meaning enters decision and action. Instrumental acts where are the expressions through which one person's meanings become available for interpretation by another. This matters because it stops us from treating meaning as one flat thing. Meaning can be latent, formulated, judged, enacted, and expressed. And theology will have to work through all of those levels. And from this, we now arrive at the famous center of the chapter, the functions of meaning. Lonergan names 4: cognitive, affective, constitutive, and communicative. The cognitive function is the most famous. Meaning takes us from the infant's world of immediacy into the adult's world mediated by meaning. And Lonergan says something here that should stay with you. The larger world does not lie within anyone's immediate experience. It is not even the sum of all worlds of immediate experience. For meaning does not merely repeat experience. It goes beyond experience through understanding and commonly through judgment. That is what makes the world mediated by meaning possible. It gives the world its structure and unity. It creates an ordered whole of familiar things, half-known things, and unknown things towards which questioning can still move. And then comes his crucial warning. The world mediated by meaning is what we commonly call the real world. But because meaning can go astray, because there is myth as well as science, fiction as well as fact, deceit as well as honesty, error as well as truth, the larger real world is insecure. That phrase there alone explains why this chapter matters. The real world we inhabit socially is never just brute fact. It is a fact as mediated by meaning. So if meaning is corrupt, the lived world is corrupt. If meaning is shallow, the lived world is shallow. If meaning is false, the communities can inhabit are nothing but illusion. This is why scholarship matters. This is why interpretation matters. This is why conversion matters. The second function is affective. Human work is not mindless. What we make, we first intend. We imagine, we plan, investigate, weigh, order, and execute. The artificial human world, cities, roads, and industries and institutions is the cumulative product of human acts of meaning. And then the third function is constitutive. This is one of the most important insights in Lonergan's whole corpus. Language, institutions, cultures, religions, sciences, philosophies, literatures, histories are not just things that happen to have meanings attached to them from the outside. Meaning is intrinsic to them. A constitution, a law, a liturgy, a doctrinal formula, a custom, a social role, a tradition, all of these are partly constituted by meaning. Change the meaning and you change the thing. And the fourth function, as we mentioned, is communicative. What one person means becomes common meaning through communication. But common meaning, we can't just stop there. And from the conjunction of the constitutive and communicative functions, Lonergan drives 3 great notions: community, existence, and history. A community, he says, is not just a number of men within a geographical frontier. It is an achievement of common meaning. There can be common experience, common understanding, common judgment, common commitment. And where those begin or end, community begins or ends. And that is immensely important for theology. Church is not merely an aggregate. It is not merely a population. Tradition is not merely repetition. They are achievements of common meaning. which also means they can be diluted or deformed or emptied out. And Lonergan says exactly that. There can be minor authenticity where a subject authentically appropriates a living tradition, but there can also be unauthenticity where one uses the words of the tradition without its real substance. The words remain, but the meaning is gone. The chair remains, the formula remains, the sacred name remains, but degeneration has set in. That is an extremely sharp diagnosis because a tradition can die without disappearing. Its term survives, its gestures can continue, its external organization can persist, and yet its meaning may be watered down, distorted, or emptied. Then Lonergan turns to realms of meaning in this chapter. This is where the chapter becomes architectonic. Different exigencies give rise to different modes of conscious operation, and these give rise to different realms of meaning. He distinguishes the realms of common sense, the realm of theory, the realm of interiority, and finally the realm of transcendence. The realm of common sense is the realm of persons and things in their relations to us. It is practical, contextual, oriented to living. The realm of theory arises with symbolic exigence. It seeks explanatory order, definitions, relations, internally coherent contexts. Theoretical objects are not known simply as extensions of common sense. They belong to different manner of apprehending reality. Then the critical exigence drives us inward to interiority. Here the subject asks the basic questions. What am I doing when I know? Why is doing that knowing? How do I know when I do it? Interiority is not introspective gazing. It is the appropriation of one's own conscious operations. And from that self-appropriation, one returns to common sense and theory with the ability to understand their difference and relations. And finally, like I said, there's transcendence. Human inquiry intends intelligibility without limit. Human judgment seeks the unconditioned. Human deliberation is dissatisfied by every merely finite good. So beyond common sense, theory, and interiority, there is a realm in which God is known and loved. This is where the whole chapter opens directly onto faith. Lonergan says later in the chapter on religion that once these realms are distinguished and related, one can understand the diversity of religious utterance. Religious experience belongs to the realm of transcendence. Foundations and method belong to interiority. Technical unfolding belongs to theory. Preaching and teaching belong to common sense. That is one of the most clarifying things he ever says about theology. It explains why scripture and creed and dogma and liturgy and mystical writing, scholastic theology and preaching can all be authentically Christian yet radically different in form. They belong to different realms of meaning. And finally, Lonergan sketches stages of meaning. The first stage follows the mode of common sense. The second adds theory, controlled by logic. The third retains common sense and theory, but science claims autonomy and philosophy turns toward interiority. These are ideal constructs, not neat chronological boxes. Different populations and even learned people may occupy different stages at once, but the model helps us understand historical development. He then traces early language from indicative significance to mimesis, analogy, and vocal signification. He shows the strengths and limits of early speech. It can name the immediately perceptible quite well. It struggles more with the generic, the abstract, time as a unified continuum, the subject as subject, and the divine as transcendent. So, meaning in early stages beyond cognitive, constitutive, and affective functions in mythic and magic. Then the Greek discovery of mind begins to sort out feeling and doing, knowing and deciding, and to break that cosmological and mythical fusion. The movement eventually opens the way for theory, for philosophical clarity, and later for the critical turn toward interiority itself. So, let me bring the whole chapter together. Why does the world mediated by meaning matter? because that is the world in which human beings actually live. We do not live only by sensation. We do not act only by brute instinct. We inherit languages, stories, symbols, institutions, memories, loyalties, arts, doctrines, horizons. Meaning mediates all of it. And because it mediates all of it, faith must enter that world intelligently, not naively. Scholarship matters because meanings can be distorted. Hermeneutics matters because meanings vary across history. Theology matters because religious meaning has to be related to culture without being dissolved into it. And conversion matters because a person or a tradition can retain the words while losing the reality. So this chapter is not an ornament. It is the hinge that makes the rest of the book possible. Without a serious account of meaning, there can be no serious interpretation, no serious history, no serious systematics, and no serious communication. In the next episode, we move to religion itself, because once Lonergan has shown that human beings live in a world mediated by meaning, the next question presses forward. How is religion situated within consciousness itself? What is the question of God, and how does religious experience arise within the structure of meaning, judgment, value, and self-transcendence?